I'm sure that most of you saw the blow-up that happened in the Oval Office last week. You know what I'm talking about. The meeting where Zelensky needled Donald Trump until J.D. Vance came in and clotheslined him, and then President Trump climbed up to the top rope and dropped the people's elbow. I'm not sure what the president of Ukraine thought he was doing during that meeting, but all he seems to have bought himself is a ticket to the poorhouse. The United States Power Company came out last week and shut off his money meter. It's no wonder he can't afford a suit. Our country has only sent him $180 billion. You can't live off of that. I have a tip. Anyone can use it. If your country is entirely dependent upon the goodwill of another country, it's not a good idea to mock the guy who signs the checks. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. On today's episode, we have three things we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about the United States pausing aid to Ukraine. We're going to talk about Donald Trump giving the annual State of the Union, and we're going to get into a little bit of economics. I know we did that last week, but we're going to talk about something a little bit different this week. We're going to talk about Ferguson's Law. But before we do any of that, first we got to read my favorite comment from last week. My favorite comment comes from Taurus Girl 240, who said, Joy Reid should join forces with Don Lemon. Well, I agree. I think that this is a great idea. I think they could host a YouTube show together. And I'm just spitballing names here, but maybe we could call it Dumb and Dumber. And Don Lemon, I'm sure, with this partnership, he would double his viewership. He'd probably get 2 to 3, maybe even 3 to 4 people who'd watch it. And so I think if he brings her on, it'd be a tremendous benefit to him. And Dumb and Dumber would probably be a huge hit among the more ignorant class of people who would want to watch that. But it would be great among that demographic of, people with a room temperature IQ. So I think that would be awesome and great for them. It's a great idea, Taurus Girl 240. I think you're onto something. Anyway, excellent suggestion. Now, let's talk about Zelensky in the White House. It's important to note here, and as I was saying in the intro, I'm sure everyone saw the big fight that happened at the end, that 10-minute clip that's going around from the meeting where things started to get a little testy and J.D. Vance got heated, then Zelensky started to say something, then Donald Trump basically just came in and said, you're not going to tell me what we're going to feel, and it's the whole thing. It's important to note that this meeting went on for just less than an hour, but it was 45 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that. And so this ending of the meeting is the only part that's getting talked about. Donald Trump sat there for a long time, and Zelensky was a little antagonistic. He has been, by the way, it is very clear. There's no love lost between Donald Trump and Zelensky. Donald Trump has said some off-the-wall things about Zelensky, calling him a dictator. He sort of implied that Ukraine started the war, which, is nonsense. Donald Trump says things. It doesn't really matter. He says stuff. I'm not concerned about it. But they don't like each other. And Donald Trump hasn't liked him, and Zelensky hasn't liked him for a long time. Basically, Zelensky campaigned for Joe Biden in the last month of the campaign before Biden, was that? Actually, I guess he was campaigning at that point for Kamala Harris because I think Joe Biden had already dropped out. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was campaigning for the Democrats, and Donald Trump obviously didn't like that, and then Donald Trump won the election, and now Zelensky has to deal with him. It was a bad idea for Zelensky to do that in the first place, but whatever. The meeting, for 40 minutes, by the way, Donald Trump sat there, and Zelensky was doing something you're really not supposed to do. When you have these meetings in the Oval Office that are open to the press, these big publicity meetings, what you're supposed to do is come in there and you're supposed to say, hey, Mr. President, you're great, we're great, this partnership, we're going to work things out, everything's going to be great. And President Trump is supposed to go, yes, we're great, you're great, this partnership is going to be great. That's what it's for. It's to showcase that. What it is not to do is a place to try and negotiate what is actually going to happen in public in front of the press. That is a bad idea. And that's what Zelensky was doing basically from the jump. He was trying to get Donald Trump to give him some security guarantees. Zelensky is there, by the way. He's there to sign a deal that's already on the table that Donald Trump has with Ukraine. Not a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, but between the United States and Ukraine. It is the rare earths mineral deal we'll talk about in a little bit. That's what Zelensky is there for. He's not there to negotiate this security agreement that wants from President Trump, and President Trump has indicated he's not willing to sign. Basically, the security agreement would be you're going to put United States troops in there, and you're going to basically act as though Ukraine is a NATO country or give them NATO membership, in which case, if Russia were to invade Ukraine, it would invoke the articles of NATO, and they would have to basically go to war with Russia. Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. It's a bad idea. So there's this whole thing. Zelensky, that's his mission. He comes in there. He keeps talking about the security guarantee. Donald Trump keeps on trying to redirect the energy other places. He allows Zelensky to go about this path, even though that is not what he's supposed to be doing during this meeting. Again, that's not the point of these meetings. It's not a negotiation at that point. It's only towards the end when he starts talking about security guarantees, again, that J.D. Vance jumps in. And J.D. Vance basically says, this is ridiculous. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to negotiate. In public, you're doing this. You're not very grateful. You've been sort of rude since you've been here to the president, and it's nonsense. And then Zelensky is trying to defend himself, and he uses a phrase. And I get it. English is not his first language. So it's a little, maybe you don't get upset with him for the phrases he chooses. But he basically comes in and he says, well, you know what? You might not be feeling this war now, but you're going to feel it. And eventually the ramifications are going to come back on you, and you'll feel this mistake and blah, blah, blah. And Donald Trump is not going to listen to that. He says, you're in no position to dictate what we are and are not going to feel. And Donald Trump's right about that. And Zelensky, again, should not be getting hostile. J.D. Vance maybe was a little bit too hostile in this exchange, but Zelensky has no place to be doing this in front of the press. This is a terrible idea. It's a terrible look. It's disrespectful to the office of the president and to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance that he would be this argumentative in front of members of the press. Again, closed doors. That's where these things are supposed to happen. If you're going to get upset, if you're going to argue, don't do it in front of the media unless you're trying to do that on purpose, which I think a lot of people think Zelensky was in there gunning for a fight. I don't think Donald Trump and J.D. Vance started the fight. And you can say whatever you want. I think Zelensky did this on purpose. That's my personal opinion. So Donald Trump comes in. There's some yelling, or at least some raised voices. And then they kick Zelensky out of the office. Donald Trump basically says Zelensky doesn't want peace. He can come back when he's ready for a peace deal, which is the other part of this, which is that Donald Trump wants peace in Ukraine. And this is a big deal because Zelensky doesn't want to admit that the war is lost on his side. It's not lost in the sense that Ukraine is going to become part of Russia, but the idea that he had in his head of a Ukrainian victory is gone. There's no such thing as a Ukrainian victory in the war. What there is right now, and by the way, there's not an overwhelming Russian victory in the war because Russia wanted to take Ukraine over, and that obviously didn't happen. So nobody's won, really. You can call it a stalemate, but it's really not, because Ukraine is losing. Despite all of our money and despite all of our weaponry, Ukraine is losing the war, and that's just a matter of size and people. It's really not anything to do with the fighting spirit of Ukraine. I'm sure those people, they fight as hard as the Russians and are very brave, and it's a noble cause. We can all say that. President Trump wants to stop it because I think he's being a realist. A lot of people say, oh, he's because he loves Putin so much. No. There's a lot of people, myself included. You can't say I'm a fan of Vladimir Putin. I don't think I've ever said a nice word. I maybe have said he's smart, which is objectively probably as true as could be, that Vladimir Putin is not a dummy. But I have nothing nice to say about him. I want an end to the war in Ukraine because I do not think it's a good thing that Ukrainians are dying. It's possible that this war is in the 7 figures. We're talking million people, maybe close to 1.5 million people in Ukraine have died from this war. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think anyone thinks that's a good thing. What is the goal of what does a Ukrainian victory look like to people who want this war to continue? Are we continuing this war to degrade Russian military? If that's your opinion, then why are you so comfortable with Ukrainians being slaughtered just to make the Russian military a little less effective? Why is that an okay thing? Why do we think that's a good idea in American foreign policy-wise? If you think that Ukraine can win, can you please explain that to me? What is Ukraine? Do you think they're taking back that territory? They don't have enough people. They're conscripting people off of the streets to go put them on the front lines. They don't have people to do this because I'm pretty sure the Ukrainian population is like 1/50th of Russia. Russia has the troops. They have the money. They have the military technology to do what they're doing indefinitely. They can sit there, and they already own the high-value lands that they wanted in Ukraine. So what does a Ukrainian victory even look like? I have no idea. I know what a Russian victory looks like. It looks like what they're doing right now, which is they just keep fighting this endless war, and eventually Ukraine doesn't have the resources or troops to actually fight, and they get a walk in. That's the long game, because Russia can do that. Russia can sit there and they can go tit for tat. It's the Civil War all over again. If you remember when Ulysses S. Grant was put in charge of the Northern armies in the Civil War, basically he said, we're not going to beat the South with military strategy. We're going to beat them with manpower. And he said, we can go in there, and you might not like this idea, but he said, we can lose the same amount of troops, but we can replenish them because we have more people. And so you'd see these giant battles that happen where both sides just took tremendous casualties. But the South didn't have the people. They didn't have the population to replace those troops. And so the North won from attrition. That's what Russia's doing in Ukraine right now. They're fighting a war of attrition, and they will win that war. Because no matter how much money, no matter how much military nonsense we give Ukraine, Ukraine doesn't have the people to staff these things. They don't have the people for the front lines to fight this fight indefinitely. So there's no such thing as a Ukrainian all-out victory. Donald Trump recognizes this. He recognizes it like a realist and says there's going to be concessions made by both sides. Russia is basically going to keep some of the territory that they've taken. Ukraine's going to get some of the territory back, and that's where we're going to leave it, and then this war is over. Zelensky isn't interested in this. He's not interested in compromise. I don't know why. Again, I don't know what his rationale is for what he thinks a victory looks like. I don't know. And so he wants this fight to keep going. I think that Donald Trump, people have talked about this rare earth mineral deal that Donald Trump has on the benefit. I think that that is a tremendous benefit to Ukraine. And it was signed eventually. It took days, but it was signed. I think Zelensky came back to the table and said, please, can I sign the paper now? And Donald Trump said, yes, please. This deal is great for the United States, and it's good for the Ukrainians. Basically, the United States is going to have access to rare earth minerals, and that's going to make us a lot of money, which is good. But it also puts Americans in Ukraine. It also puts Americans in harm's way. And Vladimir Putin, we talked about it just a minute ago, not a dummy. If there are Americans in Ukraine, let's say we send people over there to mine and to protect the mines, and we send American soldiers over there just to make sure everything's on the up and up, and Vladimir Putin attacks Ukraine, it's no longer a war, a proxy war, because he'll be attacking Americans. This is the security guarantee that Zelensky was looking for without becoming a member of NATO, without involving a U.S. military base in Ukraine. This is what he was looking for. He just, for whatever reason, just couldn't see it. And so I think Donald Trump is doing a good thing. I think that this war should end. We shouldn't just, like we did earlier, we paused all aid to Ukraine. I don't think that's the solution, but if it gets Zelensky to the table, Donald Trump is a master of using leverage. So you can't say it's the worst idea in the world. You just don't want to see Russia use this to their advantage and win. That's what you don't want. You don't want that to happen. But I don't think Donald Trump would let that happen. He's not interested in letting Russia win the war, no matter what nonsense people say about him being a Vladimir Putin fanboy or a Russian plant. That nonsense should have died 8 years ago after the Mueller report. But whatever, I digress. So anyway, I think that the Zelensky thing, I think he did the Ukrainian people a disservice with the way he acted. And I think Donald Trump actually comported himself very well. I think he conducted himself in a way that I know a lot of people were jumping on and acting like it was his fault. I don't think it was. And I think that is because you're watching the corporate media. They're willing to just say anything. Like, oh, Donald Trump is unhinged. He's unstable. Watch that whole thing. Again, it's a 50-minute long sit-down. And only the last little bit of it is contentious in that way, only after multiple times of Zelensky basically trying to put the president on the spot and make him talk about this thing that Donald Trump clearly was not wanting to talk about, and probably said, we're not going to talk about this. And so you can't blame it on him. I don't. You shouldn't. So anyway, this Ukraine thing needs to get worked out. It's too much. There's too much money we put into it, and I really think that there's just too many lives that have been lost needlessly. And it's Russia's fault. Make no mistake about that. It is Vladimir Putin's fault. It is Russia's fault. They invaded a sovereign nation. You cannot blame this on Zelensky. I thought that was bad when Donald Trump tried to imply it was somehow his fault. I think it's the more that this war drags on, though, the more that what Donald Trump said does become true, that it is Zelensky's fault that all these people are dying because his pride, his ego won't bring him to the table to recognize reality, which is that he is not going to win, all-out win this war. It just won't happen. Anyway, we're going to leave that there. Let's come and talk about topic 2, the State of the Union. Okay. I think this was one of Donald Trump's better speeches that he's done in his career, at least that I've heard. He gives some good speeches, but you can always tell when he's reading the speech. He's not necessarily the best on the teleprompter. He's more of an off-the-cuff, fire from the hip, say what's on his mind. And that's the entertaining stuff. But this was a good speech, so he did a good job. And I think it was interesting because he took the State of the Union to really hammer the Democrats. And sometimes you don't really see that in the State of the Union. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Joe Biden did that one year, and I think it's interesting that Donald Trump chose to come out there and just say, listen, I'm not interested in playing nice. Here's all the things. I'm not going to play a bunch of clips because it was a really long speech. I think Donald Trump looked like he set the record for the longest State of the Union. They looked it up earlier this week, I looked it up a little bit ago, actually, and it was Bill Clinton who had it. It was 120-something minutes, and I think Donald Trump said he went for 140 minutes. So it was a really long speech. I do want to show you. There were a few good moments. There are 2 I liked in particular, and I have to show the video for this one because I absolutely loved this one in particular. Let me pull it up here. Here we go.
The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
What a line. What a great line. And it's funny because I think it was, I can't remember now if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I made it the exact same point, which is that Joe Biden was lying when they said that they needed a border bill and Donald Trump killed it and that's why immigration was so bad. I said they're lying. They're lying, and we know they're lying because Donald Trump closed the border effectively. He did a good job when he was president, and nothing changed. And then Joe Biden became president, and he made a bunch of terrible policy decisions that made the border become a gigantic issue. And then when he tried to fix all the problems he created, he said it was Donald Trump's fault. It's so dumb, and it was such a lie. And we knew it was a lie, and that's why the Republicans didn't vote for it, because they said, you're lying. And then he tried to lay it at his feet, and everyone knew he was lying. So I love that Donald Trump said that, because it was exactly what I said, and it's just such a good lie. We didn't need a new law. We needed a new president. He just nailed it. And like I said, such a good line. And he also did, Donald Trump, he also did a very tactical thing right at the beginning of the speech where he said, it doesn't matter what I'm going to say. The Democrats are not going to clap. They're not going to stand. I could say I cured cancer, the most terrible diseases in the world, solved all the problems. They won't clap. And then they proved it. And I think their whole protest thing that they had planned, it just seemed childish and silly after that, because they wouldn't clap for a 13-year-old boy with brain cancer who Donald Trump made a honorary member of the Secret Service. They didn't clap for that. And it's like, if you can't clap for the kid with brain cancer, what are you doing? It makes you look childish. It makes you look silly. And the things that they did do, holding up the little paddles that say, that's not true, or this is weird, and that's not normal. It's like that. Those little paddles, imagine for a second that you've spent the last decade telling the American people that Donald Trump is such a threat to the democracy. He's a threat to the democracy. He's the next Hitler. Time magazine will say, put a picture of Hitler morphed with Donald Trump on the cover and say, this is America now, fascism. And you do all this stuff. You basically tell the American people that you do tell the American people that Donald Trump is Hitler. And the way that you get back at him, the way that you show your might and your protest is you hold up a little sign that says, you're a liar. It makes you look like unserious people. And that's what they look like. Al Green got thrown out he wouldn't shut up. And it's just like he had to get thrown out by the sergeant in arms. It's like, what is the point of that? It doesn't make you look good. It doesn't make anyone look good to do this to the president. It was a big deal years and years ago. You're talking all the way, I mean, not all the way back, but like when Obama was president, someone yelled out during one of his speeches to say, "You're a liar." And it made a big deal. It was a big deal in the news cycle. Now people just yell and hold up their signs and protest and do all this stuff. And it's just like, why are we doing this? Now here's a little secret about me. I love the way that the British do this, where everyone just yells. And everyone yells, and they go, "Oh, that's lies, lies, lies," whenever somebody's giving a speech. I actually think that that's great. I wish we had some more of that actual debate in America. It's weird because we're supposed to have the greatest legislative body in the world. They don't debate anything. It's important that people understand this. There is no debate in Congress. Not really. What happens is they go around and you can give a little speech, and then this person give a little speech, and that person gives a little speech, and everyone gives a little speech, and they all say the same thing because they all want to get the clip of them saying the thing so then they can show it to their voters, and then they can say, "I said the thing and did the thing in Congress." It's nonsense. What should happen is you have your entire party basically there's one guy who, he could be the sponsor of the bill, or the sponsor of the bill could pick a guy, and you bring this bill up and you're going to do it, and then you have two guys who have an actual debate on a bill and go back and forth and have a debate on a bill and whether or not it's good, whether or not it's bad. You just have two people that the representatives from the party pick to be the guy who goes and argues about the bill, and not everyone needs to make a speech. It's stupid. It doesn't work. The British way is better, where they have a debate and people just yell. I like that. So I think it's fine, except that that's not the way it's done in America. It never has been. It was a big deal when someone yelled at Barack Obama, and now everyone just seems to want to hold their little signs and make their little protests, and it makes you look like a bunch of children. I think it's silly. I don't think the Democrats came across looking good, and I think most people, when they listen to Donald Trump's speech, I think most people would probably agree with most of the things that he was saying. The Democrats are consistently trying to argue on the side of issues that the American people do not hold, and they are losing because of it. They're looking at issues that, when you're looking at polling data, that the majority of Americans don't support, and they want to take that position for the little guy, meanwhile alienating themselves from 60 to 80% of all the population out there by defending the 20%. And it's not to say you shouldn't defend the 20%, but it's not as though we're talking about racism here or anything like that. We're talking about things like, should we do experiments on little kids by giving them hormones, despite the fact that there's not a lot of good long-term research, and the long-term research we do have suggests that it doesn't actually help, and all these other health systems around the world seem to be going away from it as we continue to embrace it. And the Democrats say, yes, because it's great for this and we have to protect trans rights. Then we say, the majority of people, when they're confronted with this, they don't actually support that. And it has nothing to do with not supporting trans people. It has to do with giving kids experimental drugs. And they go, but trans is great. And you go, that's not really the issue. That's not what we're talking about. They say, do you want to have biological men compete with girls in sports? And people say, no, I don't think that sounds fair. And they say, why do you hate trans people so much? And the Americans go, well, because that quote girl over there is 6'5" and has a beard that's darker than mine, and she shouldn't be playing on the high school girls softball team. And you go, and they say, I can't believe you're such a bigot. And you go, that's just, I don't know what to tell you. That doesn't seem fair. And the Democrats want to take that position. And any poll that you find says Americans do not support that position. They don't. And the Democrats continue to do it. They do this on everything. They're doing it with Ukraine right now. You look at polling for Ukraine, and Donald Trump called this out during the speech, which was another one of the best moments in the thing. They said, we need to look for a peaceful end to this war. And if you look around, Americans want this war to stop in Ukraine. They do not want to sign endless checks to Ukraine. They want the war to stop. And so he says they want this to stop, and the Democrats were like booing. And then there was a spot, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said, who wants this war to continue for another 5 years? And Elizabeth Warren's sitting in the front row, and she starts clapping. And he says, oh, look, Pocahontas wants the war to go on. And it just calls her out, and it was great. It was fantastic. My overall take on the speech is that it went really well. I think Donald Trump is really just feeling comfortable. He's feeling good right now, and he's racking up victories in the legislature. He's racking up victories, racking up victories on the executive side. I think that it's just a very important thing for him to just feel good and comfortable. And as long as he continues to do that, he's going to keep getting these sort of this momentum. And when he has that momentum and you can tell he's in the zone, he's just on one. And he is a formidable person to deal with in politics, and we just hope it keeps going because, like I said, this speech, it was an hour and 40 minutes. It was long, but he doesn't lose energy. He keeps going, and it was great. He had some great moments. I think it was a good thing. And the American people, by the way, support that. I saw some polling data out there that was suggesting that the American people agreed with most of what he said. And he did win the popular vote, so I would tend to believe that poll. I think it was from CNN who actually had that on. So anyway, overall, great. Now, let's switch. I want to talk about topic 3. This is back. We're getting a little, we're going to bring it down a notch. We're up on our highs right now because we're talking about Donald Trump and all his victories, and we all feel good. And then I got to bring you down. Again, we got to bring it back down to earth because I'm going to go in about what we were talking about, my worries about the economic future of the United States. And I had some great comments about this last week. I know Kevin, our number one friend Kevin, in particular, had a really good comment about that where he disagreed with me a little bit, and I hope Kevin is correct. That's what I'll say. I hope I'm wrong, and I'm reading the tea leaves wrong, and my predictions about the economy going through some trouble is absolutely wrong. However, I have another data point to point to that is another worrying thing to be concerned about. There's a historian. I actually, you know what? I should have looked this up. I think his name was Adam, but I'm not 100% sure. But there's a historian I like. This guy, he's been on a lot of podcasts, and he's written some great books. His name is Neil Ferguson. It looks like when you're reading his name is spelled like, it looks like Nile, but it's pronounced Neil. Neil Ferguson. And if you don't know him, you should check him out because he's very smart. He's a great writer and a very smart guy. I sometimes wonder about that because he's got that posh British accent. And, sometimes I wonder if he's, those guys are really as smart as they are, or if it's the damn accent that just sends it that way. But then you read his writing and you're like, oh, no, this guy's actually just really smart. Neil Ferguson, he was talking about this thing this week called Ferguson's Law. It's not his law. There's another Ferguson. I think the Ferguson he was referring to, his name is Adam Ferguson, but you'd have to fact check me on that. But anyway, Ferguson's Law states, and I'm going to read a quote from Neil Ferguson here. It says, quote, any great power that spends more on debt service, interest payments on national debt, than on defense will not stay great for very long. This was true of Habsburg Spain, true of the Ottoman Empire, true of the British Empire. This law is about to be put to the test in the U.S. beginning this very year, when, according to the CBO, net interest outlays will be 3.1% of GDP and defense spending 3%. End of quote. So, Neil Ferguson is referring to another Ferguson when he talks about the Ferguson Law. The Ferguson Law, to simplify what I just said, it basically states that if you spend more on your national debt than you do on your military spending, that is when great empires fall. Happened with the Ottoman Empire, happened in Spain, happened in France. It's basically a law that seems like an actual universal law. This is the first year, or I guess technically last year. Last year was the first year that we spent more on our national debt than we did on our defense spending. I do not want 2025 to be the year in the history books that is noted as the start of the downfall of the great American empire. I am afraid that it is. And again, we talked about economics last week. We talked about all these things that I was worried about. But this is just another indicator that things are not right in the way we spend money in the country. We need to pay off some debt. We need to shrink these deficits. We need to fix this problem. It is not sustainable forever. The only reason America runs the world, the only reason we're the great world hegemony, is because people believe we are. And they buy our debt, and they buy our bonds, and they use the American dollar as the reserve currency worldwide. That is the only reason we are number one. Any of that can go away. It is not, we take it for granted because as long as anyone watching this podcast has been alive, America has been number one. We have been the leader of the world. That's just the way it is. We have the strongest economy in the world, the strongest military in the world. Our culture dominates in other places in the world. You go to, like I've always said, you go to other countries, you hear American music, you see American stars in advertisement. Other places can pretend that American culture is blah, 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 blah. Oh, the French, oh, we don't like American culture. Go to France and then see how much American culture you spot around France, and then look at the United States and see how much French culture we have here. It's not the same. We dominate the world, and we take it for granted. But it doesn't always stay that way, and it won't always stay that way. Eventually, America will not lead the world. It could be 100 years from now, or it could be in the next decade. We don't know the answer. And as long as our finances are going in this direction, I worry it's going to be sooner rather than later. We have to make some hard changes. We have to cut things. We have to cut things that people don't want to cut. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We need to cut these things. They are going to bankrupt us. They are a gigantic driver of our national debt. We cannot allow the need to pay these things to dictate our spending forever. It's just they're bad ideas. Hard changes, cut things, stop the spending, cut the deficit. That's what we need to move forward and stay on top. And I hope people listen. And again, I'll also say this. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Kevin's right. I hope anyone who is in there saying I'm wrong, I don't know how to read the signs of the economy very well, or whatever the case may be. I'm not a certified economist. Okay, whatever. I hope that you're all right. I hope I'm wrong. But who knows? So anyway, we just need to be worried. We need to be wary. We need to be worried. We need to be concerned about our future, and taking care of this spending would make everybody feel better. And it's just a good idea in general. We can't be $34 trillion in debt. It's mind-boggling to think about. $34 trillion. It doesn't make any sense. You can't picture it. You cannot imagine what $34 trillion looks like. It doesn't, like, you think about it in your mind and just try and picture how much money that is. If you stack it up in $100 bills, you can't. You have no idea. It's unbelievable. I think, if I remember correctly, $1 million in $100 bills weighs like between 20 and 22 pounds. I can't remember exactly where. But you think about that. $1 million weighs 20 pounds. So if $1 million weighs 20 pounds, what the hell does $34 trillion even weigh? How much money would that take? Is there even that much money in circulation? Can we even see it in a physical realm? Does it even exist? Do we have that much? Is there even that much gold in Fort Knox? Are we doing a real audit of Fort Knox? Anyway, I don't want to go down these rabbit holes. These things just get me all worked up and all in the mood to rant about money in the Federal Reserve. And we don't need to hear that. Down with the Federal Reserve rant again. I'm sure you've heard it enough. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the week. As always, people, questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. I've been kicking around this idea, and I was going to throw it out here at the end of the podcast and see if anyone wanted to tell me if it's good or bad. So I noticed that I love making the YouTube shorts because they're fun. Writing the intro is fun. The YouTube shorts do a lot of views. People just watch shorts on YouTube. So I've been thinking about releasing some YouTube shorts about other things that also I like doing. So my main thing that I was thinking about is I go to the movies like at least once a week. Okay, sometimes twice a week, at least once a week. So I've been thinking about doing some 1-minute movie reviews for YouTube, which I think would be fun. And I might release those next week. So if anyone thinks that's a good or bad idea, or you're like, hey, why would you do that? That's stupid. Feel free. Leave it in the comments below. I enjoy movies. I enjoy writing the YouTube shorts. I enjoy doing both. I think it'd just be fun. It'd be fun for me, and I think it would get a lot of views on the channel because, like I said, those YouTube shorts that I put out on Fridays, they do views compared to like the main video, which the podcast will get downloads somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people, depending on the episode. The YouTube short by itself will get thousands of views, just one YouTube short, and they take a minute to produce. So they're very simple compared to these long-form podcasts. Anyway, just an idea. Tell me what you think, and let me know in the comments. And as always, I will catch you guys next Friday.